Friends, in a few days, Kerala, together with some other states and union territories of the country, would be going through the poll process to elect a new government to run the state. Kerala elections, however, are not just important for electing a new government for the state. They are at a very critical juncture in the country's life. At this moment, there is a real onslaught of neo-fascism on the entire polity and society. Our constitution is under attack. Our democratic structures are under attack. Our entire set of institutions, which are supposed to defend the democratic structure, are being subverted. And civil liberties, the freedom of expression, the ability to read and write whatever one wishes to, is getting completely subverted because of the emergence of neo-fascism in the country. Now, this is not just a phenomenon which is confined to India. Neo-fascism is a phenomenon which is now emerging globally, and it is symptomatic of the fact that neoliberal capitalism is in a situation of crisis. Basically, whenever there is an economic crisis, you find that corporate capital gets the support of fascist and now neo-fascist elements to prop itself up, to defend itself, to support itself, to derive sustenance from these elements. Corporate capital finances them, and they in turn change the discourse, change the political discourse away from, or the economic discourse, away from the question of the crisis, the distress of the working people, the unemployment, to the other, to a division of the people along the lines of us and them, into a majority and a minority. They hold up a hapless minority group as the villain, and then they blame the ills of society, the distress of the people upon this hapless minority. This is typical of fascism. And I want to make it very clear that fascism is not just an obnoxious phenomenon, it is a phenomenon which is sustained and supported by corporate capital in a situation of crisis. Fascist elements exist in any modern society, but they come center stage only when corporate capital supports them with huge amounts of money, with huge amounts of newspaper space in corporate-owned media, and thereby brings them forward so that they can defend corporate interests and at the same time blame not the corporates, not capitalism, not the functioning of the economy, but on some hapless minority, blame some hapless minority for the crisis which is engulfing society and the economy. This is exactly what had happened in the 1930s. In the Great Depression, huge unemployment in Germany, in Japan, all over the world. And in this situation of unemployment, corporate capital really financed the emergence of fascist forces, fascist elements, so that they could then get the support of these fascist elements to remain in power and to not be facing the anger of the masses, because fascism plays the role of diverting the discourse. Now, this is exactly something which is happening now. Neoliberalism has run into a dead end. This is something which even liberal bourgeois newspapers and spokesmen, not in our country, but say in the United States, in the United Kingdom, even liberal bourgeois newspapers are admitting that really something new has to be done, except that within the framework of neoliberal capitalism, they cannot think what new can be tried out. Until now, neoliberal capitalism, even though people were becoming worse under it, sustained itself on the prop that tomorrow will be better. That basically the effects of growth are going to trickle down to everybody. All right, you may be suffering today, doesn't matter. Tomorrow you're going to be better off. But with neoliberal capitalism now getting into a crisis, with the entire growth under neoliberal capitalism coming to an end, and it's coming to an end is a result of its own inner, immanent logic, you find that now it really needs the support of the fascist and semi-fascist elements. In our country, this is happening all over, as I said, Ukraine, Germany, Poland, Hungary, the United States, Brazil, the Philippines, and so on, where fascist element, Turkey, are in India, they're in power. But in other countries also, where they are not in power, they are actually on the ascendancy. Very, very serious contenders for power. They are actually making a push for power. For instance, AFD in Germany, the UKIP in Britain, Marine Le Pen's party in France, you just name it. Everywhere in the world, fascist elements are coming up. And these elections in India, by the way, the Indian fascism is much closer to classical fascism than even these other forces that I have been talking about. In India, for instance, a gentleman called, because as you know, the RSS was founded in 1925, and a gentleman called Dr. Munje, an RSS ideologue, had actually gone to meet Mussolini at a time, I must remind you, when Jawaharlal Nehru, a leader of the anti-colonial struggle in the country, Mussolini was very keen to meet Jawaharlal Nehru, but Jawaharlal Nehru, when he was returning after his wife's death in a sanatorium in Switzerland, stayed in the plane in Rome, did not get down, even though Mussolini's emissary pleaded with him for more than an hour, for 2 hours, to simply get down and have a talk with Il Duce. So at a time when the Indian anti-colonial struggle was clear in its opposition to fascism, you actually had the RSS people meeting the fascist elements, and therefore they are very clearly closer to classical fascism than even anywhere else in the world. And what is more, Golwalkar actually expressed admiration for Hitler's treatment of the Jews, something which, of course, was later, kind of taken out of his book, but it was there. So this is the situation in which we are in this country. Kerala elections are extremely important in deciding which way the country is going to go. And for any fight against fascism, the most reliable, the most consistent, the most far-sighted force is, of course, communism. The communists have always been in the forefront of the fight against fascism. As a matter of fact, in all the talk that has occurred around the Second World War, it is often in the spirit of the Cold War pushed to the background that Hitler was defeated by the Soviet Union. Professor Joan Robinson, one of the outstanding economists of the 20th century, who had a very close link with Kerala, used to come there every year and spend some time in the Center for Development Studies in Thiruvananthapuram. Professor Joan Robinson always used to say, when someone was very critical of the Soviet Union, that do not forget, but for the Soviet Union, we would not be sitting here today. She was an English lady, a professor at Cambridge. So the point is that historically, the force that has been most consistent and thoroughgoing in its anti-fascism and fighting fascism has been the communists. And therefore, this is something which is also admitted by the fascist elements themselves. For instance, uh, it is mentioned in Golwalkar that our three enemies, one of them is the Muslims, the other is the communists, and the third is English educated people. But the point is that they see the communists as their most basic enemy. And as a matter of fact, you find that the ABVP as a student body was set up not by the BJP, is not a front organization of the BJP, by the RSS to fight communist influence in the universities. Even today, the attack in premier universities of the country, like Jawaharlal Nehru University, Yadavpur University, and so on, this attack is in order to get rid of the communist influence. As a matter of fact, one of the BJP leaders in Bengal has recently just said that we need a surgical strike on Yadavpur University in order to get rid of communist influence among students. In JNU, this is exactly what has happened, which is my own university. So the most consistent force in the fight against fascism is, of course, the communists. And imagine, similarly, in the last few days and months and years, in Kerala, the LDF government has stood rock solid in the fight against fascism. Not only on the issues of CAA, NRC, and so on, but on every issue. Center-state relations, centralization of political powers, centralization of economic resources, attack on the minorities, on every such issue, the LDF government has stood rock solid for democracy and against the fascist elements. Uh, of course, it is a state government. A state government cannot really do away with central laws. But on the other hand, this state government, as a state government, has been absolutely reliable, has been absolutely firm in its struggle against fascism. I'm not saying that in Kerala, fortunately in Kerala, the political electoral choice is not between the communists and the fascists. The political electoral choice is between the LDF and the UDF, which also consists of political parties which are secular. In other words, I'm not denying or doubting their secular credentials. They're not people who believe in Hindu Rashtra and so on. But what I'm trying to say is that today, in the context of the fight against fascism, a left government in Kerala is absolutely crucial, not just for Kerala, it's crucial for the country as a whole. That if in the country there has to be a fight against fascism, then having a left government in Kerala, which would strengthen the left forces all over the country, which would be a beacon of light for everybody all over the country to look up to, and that would be crucial in the fight against fascism. Therefore, the point of the why I would like, above all, I am aware of the achievements of the LDF government in terms of tackling the floods, in terms of tackling the COVID-19 crisis, and so on. I have been a part of that government, and therefore I know the details of how the LDF government has really, been behind the Kerala model that is now being talked about all over the world. Nowhere in the world you have a third world country or a state or a region which has as developed human development indices as you have in Kerala. I'm aware of that. But to my mind, something which is far, far more important, far more immediate than all these is the fight against fascism. And that fight against fascism can be carried forward in today's context by a left government, by a communist government. In fact, in India, the communists have got a tradition of the defense of democracy, which is really quite unparalleled. I would, Amartya Sen, the well-known economist, my teacher, in fact, who gave currency to the idea of the Kerala model all over the world, quotes the English author Walter Bagehot, the 19th century English author Walter Bagehot, to the effect that democracy is government by discussion. Democracy is not a state of affairs in which the government says something and that goes. Democracy is a state of affairs where the government is sensitive to public opinion. Therefore, democracy is government by discussion. Nowhere in India is this as strongly practiced, as pronouncedly practiced as in Kerala today. In fact, in that sense, Kerala is really an outlier. I can think of several instances, at least three instances in the last few, in last 2-3 years, in which the government has taken a decision. There have been protests by people, by intelligentsia, by civil society groups and so on. And because of these protests, the government has withdrawn from the position it had taken. Now, this is something which is quite unthinkable in contemporary India. Farm laws were introduced by Narendra Modi government. Farmers have been agitating against these laws for well over 100 days, but Modi remains adamant. He says, no, these laws are good for the people. These laws are good for the farmers. The farmers themselves are saying, no, they are no good. They are going to destroy us. But Modi says that they are very good because the proposition is that the leader knows best. This is a fascist mindset. I would like to contrast this mindset with the communist mindset, at least as we see in India, namely the democratic mindset, the systematic democratic mindset. To my mind, by the way, communism is the systematic practice of democracy. That capitalism subverts democracy, and going beyond capitalism, which is what communists want, is something which is to carry forward carry forward the democratic tradition. Communism is really it aims to bring democracy to life. And in India, the communists, as I said, have really been practitioners of democracy. And one instance of this is the fact that the government in Kerala, on a number of occasions, the latest, of course, being about cases being instituted against those who are actually protesting against the CAA. The government decided that look, I mean, these cases should be there because of whatever law and order problems they violated, etc. But on the other hand, because of the opposition from civil society, the government withdrew. Now, that, to my mind, the fact that an elected government, instead of standing on ceremony, standing on prestige, and insisting that we know best what is good for society, actually bows before the people, bows before the pressures of the people, and withdraws legislation which it itself has brought together. I mean, withdraws decisions that it had actually taken about various issues, is something which, to my mind, is symptomatic of a democratic government. No government would have done what the LDF government has done in all these situations, in all these cases. And therefore, I believe that the LDF government is practicing democracy in the most clear-cut fashion. I would like to suggest that in today's context, I began by talking about neo-fascism. Neo-fascism is, of course, a symptom of neoliberalism in crisis. Therefore, overcoming neo-fascism requires overcoming the conjuncture which has actually produced neo-fascism, which means it requires overcoming neoliberal capitalism, which has now got itself into an intractable crisis. The crisis is not going to be resolved in neoliberal capitalism, and therefore going beyond neo-fascism, defeating neo-fascism requires, of course, it requires tactical decisions of various kinds, electoral adjustment, this, that, and the other, but above all, it requires a vision. It requires going beyond neoliberal capitalism, transcending the current conjuncture of neoliberal capitalism. And this is something which only those who have the vision to go beyond would be able to do. And the communists have that vision. In fact, the communists are distinguished from every other political formation in the fact that while every other political formation remains limited to defeating fascism, yes, I mentioned that in Kerala, even UDF has got secular, it has secular parties in it. But you see, these secular parties nonetheless see this neo-fascism essentially in political terms. That, okay, these fellows, did electoral malpractices, or they kind of use some kind of uh, tricks of the trade in order to win and so on. But everything is discussed in terms of political expediencies which the neo-fascists may have used to come to power. The communists are the only persons who actually have an understanding of the political economy of neo-fascism and have the willingness and the courage and the vision to think in terms of going beyond neo-fascism. Therefore, as I mentioned, not only in general, communism is totally opposed to fascism. Fascism believes in dividing the people. Communism believes in uniting the people. Uniting the people in a brotherhood of the oppressed, of the workers, of everybody who's willing to join in the grand vision of the liberation of the working people and their awakening to freedom. And this is therefore a general contradiction between fascists and communists. But this general contradiction is something which is even more strongly relevant in the current conjuncture, because going beyond neo-fascism requires going beyond the crisis-ridden neoliberal capitalism. And this is the reason why the communists alone have the vision to lead the struggle against fascism. I'm not saying the communists alone are going to fight fascism. Of course, it has to be a united front of all the people. But among these people, in this united front, the presence of the communists is absolutely essential. The vision of the communists is absolutely essential. The foresight, the theory, the reading of the situation the communists have is absolutely essential. And it is for this reason that in the national scenario today, the fight against fascism would lose immensely if the communists are not a part of it, or if they are weak. By the way, fascism itself would not have arisen if the communists had not got weakened for a variety of reasons I don't wish to go into in the last few years. But the point is that since the communists have got weakened, but Kerala is one place where they remain powerful. The people of Kerala are sympathetic to the vision of the communists, and therefore this vision of the communists is absolutely essential for any fight against fascism. And to carry forward this fight to completion, to carry forward this fight to success, if Indian communists have to make a mark, then the one state in which they have a government, the one state that still preserves the strength of the communists, must re-elect them. The LDFs coming into power in the coming elections is absolutely essential for the people of the country to defeat fascism. And therefore, I would urge the voters to vote the LDF to power, because not just because of its achievements within Kerala, but above all, because the situation in the country, I would even say the situation in the world, is one which demands it. Because rolling back neo-fascism is something which is going to be greatly helped with the victory of the LDF. Thank you very much.